Okay, welcome back to the build. In this video we're going to be taking a look at the stem, and there's a few things that we've got to consider before we start to try and shape this. So we're going to take a look at the 3D model over in the office, so we'll head into there and take a look at a few things before we get started. Okay, so if we take a look at how our stem is currently, we've got our laminated stock and we need to begin beveling the stem, but there's something else that we've got to do just first, and we'll take a look at that now. So we can see our stem stock here follows our mould that we've cut down and we've put into place up against frame one. So if we look at that from the side, that is the shape of the lamination that we've currently got on this, but we then take a look at what the stem needs to be, and you can see here that this is a profile of our trimmed stem. So actually the forward edge of that stem is not currently quite the right shape, so we've laminated a piece of stock that's big enough to get this part out of, but the forward curvature of our stem isn't correct at the moment. And that is probably the first thing that we need to do before we start to do any of the beveling work on this. So there's a new part that I've created for this. This is one of the things that's come up along the way actually, is that there's a little bit of extra work needed in with this that I hadn't factored in for the original plans. So we've got a new part for that, which is this stem pattern. So if we take a look at the stem pattern, this can be MDF or pretty much any kind of scrap wood that you've got that you can cut this out of. Doesn't need to be anything particularly fancy or dimensioned in any particular way. I've just drawn this in 6mm MDF. That'd be perfectly suitable for this. And that's a pattern that then fits on the side of the stem, references the forward end curvature of that mould that we formed the lamination with, and it gives the outer profile of the stem as we need it to be, so we can pattern that across into our lamination. Got a couple of references on there, so we've got the bottom edge of the pattern fits in with waterline 1. We've got the stem top trim line on there, which will match where our stem's trimmed to, and then we've also got our chine top landing mark as well. You'll notice that we've got a step in the forward end of the stem, and that's where we've got a differing thickness in the bottom planking and the side planking. So we'll see the effects of that as we start to do various different elements within the boat. So that's going to give us the forward curvature of our stem. So first thing we're going to do is get one of those little patterns cut, and we'll chuck it on the model and see what it does. Okay, so we've got our stem pattern here. Now the back edge of this stem pattern aligns with the forward edge of the mould that we've already got in place here. So that means that it's just going to position like this on the side of our stem alongside our stem mould, and as we saw, we've got several alignment points there, so we can just get those trued up with our waterline 1 mark, our trim line for the top edge of the stem, and then our chine line as well. Now for the keen-eyed people amongst you, some of you will probably have already noticed this, that we have a bit of spring back in this lamination. And spring back is when you create a lamination and you bend to a curvature, so we've used this jig as the curvature, and then once you release that, it springs back slightly and you end up with a piece that is not quite the same shape as your jig. In most of the instances that you'll see in this boat, that isn't too much of an issue, and I didn't really think that it warranted creating two separate jigs. I did think about, when I was creating these plans, possibly doing a lamination jig and then an alignment jig, so you'd actually have two of these with different curvatures, one that would laminate that to a slightly over compensated curve and then allow for the spring back. Spring back's a little bit of a difficult thing to definitively determine based on the fact that people might be using different thickness laminations for this, they might be using different timbers, so it's quite a difficult thing to do, and it means doubling up on all these lamination jigs, which seemed a bit of an unnecessary waste really. So anyway, we've got a slight spring back on this, and you can see that in the gap down at the bottom. Now what we're going to do is we're going to compensate for that, so that basically means that our stem is a little bit further forward than it needs to be in this this point right at the top. The bottom edge of it is in the correct position because that's all determined by the rest of the things we've got going on, and so our spring back is just squeezing out forward a little bit with the stem. So when we position our pattern on here, because that is referencing the jig, which is placed within the strongback system and not the stem, that's going to take out that tolerance now. So as we put this pattern in place, we're referencing the forward edge of our stem from this mold face, and we're sort of losing the spring back within that. Now what that means is that we're actually losing a little bit of thickness within the stem, so that gap that you can see down there is lost material effectively as this stem curves forward. I'm not going to worry too much about that in this instance, certainly because this is only a model. With the real boat, if you wanted to compensate for that, all you've got to do is to basically add a couple of additional laminations, and that could be done a little bit further down the line actually, probably once this stem mold is out of place, or you could do it before you actually put the stem in there. I'm not 100% sure that that actually needs to be added back in. Not entirely sure how much that's actually really going to affect the boat losing. You know, we're realistically losing, I would think, on the real boat, if you have the same volume of spring back, you're maybe losing 6mm of lamination thickness on there. So it's a minuscule change. I don't think that's massively going to affect the strength of the boat. So anyway, we account for that spring back. We're losing it within this as we now mark the correct forward shape of our stem. So let's get our pattern in place and we'll mark the shape of that. Okay, so there you can see our stem marked out. Done both sides of it. So you can see the difference in the line that we actually want to get out of that. So we've laminated enough material to get our full thickness just here on the thickest part of the stem, but a couple of other places we've got fairly significant additional material. And you can see the extent of that spring back there, so that's probably about 3 or 4mm, I would think, on this scale. So that's going to be, I suppose that's going to be probably 10 to 12mm, possibly even more on the full-size boat. As I say, there are ways to put that material back in there quite easily if you want to beef that stem back up. But the main thing is that our correct profile is taken from this edge of the jig, which is aligned within the strong back. So we've now got this forward line correctly referenced where it needs to be to get the boat the right shape. So we'll get that trimmed down next. Okay, so you can see I actually went over to the shoulder plane again. It's a little bit better size for this, and it just means that I can take down the whole width of the stem at the same time. These little planes are a little bit too narrow for that, so this was doing the job a bit better. So what I'm doing here is I'm taking down to either side of the line, so you can just see that our line is left there, and then same on this side. So I'm just bringing down a kind of balance of the two. I'll show you with the heel of the plane. So what ends up happening is that you've got you can see that you're coming down to the line on that side, and you're coming down to the line on that side, and you've got a high spot in the middle. So once you're satisfied that you've come down to where that line is, you just need to then join a flat spot between the two. So that's what I'm doing now. I've got down to the line on both sides, but I'm still a little bit high in the middle. And the center line of this is what we really want the profile to be shape to, because we're going to bevel off the edges here. So we want the center to be true. So that's why we want to get a nice flat transition between the two. So I'll carry on working on that a little bit more. Okay, so now you can see we've got the forward end of our stem profile correctly shaped. Where this kind of blends into the keel section up here, obviously our stem profile comes up as far as there, but then remember that when we cut our keel we've got these little markers here, so we're starting to unearth that now as we take a bit of material off. And if you look very closely you might just be able to see it right in the center of that. I've just hit the bottom of that trench that we cut as we transpose that line up through there. So I know that at that point there, I'm at the correct height for that section of the keel. Obviously we've done that already on this frame here. You can see there just that trench disappears. So we know that that center line is the correct height. We've also got the same height on the frame one there, and then we follow into our line that we've just marked. So that is our outer profile set. Okay, so the chines are going to come in next. We're going to set those into the stem first, and they're going to help us to get guidance on the shape of the stem and generally start to kind of dial things in up in the forward end of the boat where there's quite a lot of stuff going on. So if you remember that we laminated the chines quite some time ago, and these have still got to be fitted into all these notches along the boat, so we've got to bevel all those, and there's a couple of things to consider with the way that they interact with the stem. So what we're actually going to do, we'll just jump back into the office and take a look at the 3D model again, because that's going to give us really quick, easy insight into how this works in the forward end of the boat right now. So you can see our beveled stem here, and we're taking a look at the chines. So there's a couple of things going on with the chines. We've got the flat, which is this laminated section of 3 layers of plywood, which we've got here, so we've already got that part. We've got a top rail which we're going to put in, and that is going to help to carry the side planking when we put that in, and then we've got a bottom rail which is going to land our bottom planking when that comes into place. So the first thing that we want to do right now is to get this chine flat into place, and you can see by looking at this here just how that fits and aligns. So you can see that there's this angle on the chine flat, so this is going to notch into the stem at this angle. So if we look at that from the underside, you can see that the back edge of that chine flat sits flush with the side of the stem, and then the forward end just comes to a point right up forward there. So we've now got this forward profile, so we can use that to get the position of that forward point by combining that with a nice center line, which we'll draw in a second. And then we've got the back edge here, which is the rear portion of the side of our stem. So if we turn off our top rail, we can see that the line that we've got on our jig here, which we transposed out onto our stem, references the top face of our chine flat lamination there, which is what we've got, and that's going to help us to get it positioned in the correct place. So let's get that positioned and we'll start notching it in. So the first thing that is almost essential to have is going to be a center line, so we're going to mark that down the middle of our stem now. Then we can bring in our chine lamination. Now this is going to be a bit of a case of kind of bringing everything in all together, so we're going to be doing some little adjustments to all kinds of things. As we mark the notch for this, we're going to try and bring the chine in a little bit, but in order to get that up to the correct height at the moment, we're fouling a little bit on frame 1. So frame 1 needs to be beveled just to allow that chine to come up a little bit. And the same with frame 2 and several of these along here. So this is going to be a bit of a balancing act now of making little adjustments to all kinds of things at the same time. But the goal really is to try and get this chine brought in so that this inner edge is in its correct place and at the correct height so that we can get it into the stem. So I'll get working on that. It's going to be a bit of a mix of stuff, but we'll get going. Okay, so with a bit of work, I've managed to get the chine to come down to the correct height so that the top of it is meeting this line here. So then I was able to mark the bottom line, and now we can cut a little relief cut. So what we want to do with this here is to cut a line. So if you remember that the back face of the flat pretty much came to the back of the stem there on the side, and then the forward point of the flat is going to join our center line. So we want to cut a line that goes from that center line out to that surface, out to that edge just there. So I'll start that off by lining up my saw in the two different planes. We'll just get a little nick on the corner to get my saw in the right place. Then I can sight down the two different lines and make a cut that is going to end up following the right line for where I want to be. So with my saw in position, you can see where that channel is travelling. So it's coming from the side, just forward of the back face of the stem there on the side, and then we're meeting through that centre line. So that's the line that we want to follow with the forward tip of the chine. And the same thing is going to happen for the top line, which is marked just there. So we'll cut the second one of those and then we'll try and fit the chine. Okay, so you can see an initial fit of that chine flat into there. It's not far off. We've got a little bit of a gap on the back edge still there, so that just wants to come in a touch more, and that adjustment can either be done by just deepening this notch, or we could possibly take a little bit off this face here just to get the two mating nicely. You can see based on frame 1 we've got to come in a little bit further here. We want to come in until we're meeting that frame nicely, but that's also a combination of some things further aft as well. So getting all of these notches, you can see I haven't beveled this one yet, so this means that the chine is still out in this direction. So we want to work down all of these frames and just transpose those, and we can actually get a gauge for that now that we have the chine flat sat there. So all we need to do is just copy the line that you see here across to these frames and transpose that, so that's going to allow us just to move things in a little bit. So carry on with a bit more work and get it placed a bit better. One thing to note, if you remember from the video where we laminated this is far wider than it needs to be at the moment. So to allow for slippage between the layers here, this pattern part, so these are CNC cut, if you remember, you see one of the little dovetails there. These are far wider than they need to be, which allows you to trim them down and get these edges nice and neat once you've finished laminating the layers together. So that is the reason that we've got masses of extra material here on the outside. Of course, the outer edge of this chine should meet to a point at the stem. So we've got a fair bit of material to take off here, but once we've got that into place laterally, we can then start to size that for its correct size. So if it looks a little bit chunky at the moment, and the fact that we've got loads of overhang on these frames, that's why it is. There's plenty of extra in the parts there for trimming. Okay, so with a bit more work done on that, you can see we've got a nice fit of the chine flat lamination now into the stem. You can see that we've got frame 1 beveled to follow that line, so that fits up nicely against that. Same with frame 2 and 3 and back aft down the boat. So we're getting a nice fit for that chine flat to be in place now, which is a good start. Okay, so now that we've got our chine flat in place, we can start to take a look at the top rail, which is going to go on the top side of the chine, and the bottom rail, which is going to catch our bottom planking, which we looked at when we were in the office in the 3D model. So the top rail is going to look something a little bit like this, and it's going to fit on the top side of this chine and be sprung in like so. Now this is going to obviously be set into our framework, but not entirely set into our framework. So one of the things with this design is that the top side battens will be floated, which means that these frames won't actually be in full contact with the sides of the boat. The top side battens will be slightly proud of them, and that will also apply to this top rail for the chine. So as I said, we've got a massive overhang on this at the moment. We're going to set that top rail of the chine into place, and then we'll be able to trim the excess off of this chine flat to match that. So this is going to go on the top side here, and we'll let that in. That will also get notched into the stem in the same way that we did with the chine flat. And then we've got the bottom rail for the chine as well, which is going to go on this edge here, and that will get sprung in this direction. And then what we're going to do is transmit these lines down from the frames, and we'll bevel this off so that it can receive the bottom planking into the chine flat. Okay, so we're going to continue that next load of work when we do the topside battens. I'm going to get a set of topside battens machined up for the boat. We'll start to let them into place, and we'll do the sides of the boat. We'll kind of bring all that into shape. We'll put our chine bottom rail on, and then a little bit more beveling, and we'll be ready to put some bottom planking on. So we're slowly getting there. As I said several times in this series before, this is as much for me to learn how to do this as it is for me to show you, and I'm certainly learning along the way. So we'll leave it at that for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will catch you in the next one, where we'll put in some topside battens and we'll press on. Cheers guys.